Canada's food inflation and credit card debt is reaching record levels. What could this mean for the economy? Let's dig right into it. So CBC put this out about inflation, and doesn't the headline seem a little misleading? Because when you're talking about food inflation, if I take you over to that, we're at levels not seen for nearly 50 years in Canada in terms of food inflation. And if you look at it, we set another record in January on food inflation, still at 10.4%. And this is obviously the CPI. So we know that number is more like 20, 30%. I've seen many products in the grocery store, as have probably you, that have gone up 30% or even more than that. And I haven't seen anything where I thought, wow, this has come down a lot. You know, it is just kind of crazy. So anyway, CBC does say further down, so they start off going on about how inflation is coming down, interest rates are going up, everything is great. Obviously, CBC is basically the government. But what's interesting is at the end, they talk about what's going on with groceries, which I find very, very interesting. Meanwhile, grocery prices rose faster last month, with prices up 11.4% compared to a year ago. The federal agency says prices for meat, bakery goods, and vegetables all rose faster. It's like everything is being doubled in price, Leon Brown said outside of a no-frills grocery store in Toronto. That's a budget grocery store in Canada, for those of you that don't know. Almost every time I come back, there's another addition to the price. Fresh and frozen chicken was especially pricey, rising 9% from December, an increase that Statistics Canada attributed to seasonal demand and supply issues with the avian flu. You know what's really interesting, and I do find this interesting, is in Canada you have basically got a monopoly. You have a monopoly in practically everything from travel, airlines, you know, everything essentially is in a monopoly. But grocery stores is just one more of those monopolies. And you've got essentially Loblaws, Sobeys, and a couple of other chains, and that is just really it. You've got 2 or maybe 3 grocery store chains at best. And within those chains, you have like 7 or 8 different grocery stores. And obviously what happens in Canada, because this is what happens in the crony capitalist countries that have this sort of stupid competition rules, is it means essentially that every time a grocery store comes along that could potentially challenge the bigger chains, they either take them over or squash them. So it's just kind of a disaster when you've got these massive companies in the banking sector, airlines, all these other things. It just creates higher prices because they can control and manipulate everything. They have no competition that is undercutting them, so what do they really care? And obviously, this is what you have to think about the World Economic Forum and what goes on behind the closed doors at the World Economic Forum. It's these sort of negotiations. I mean, there's a reason why the airlines were trying to take down Flair when it was found out that they may or may not have 100% or whatever it is, I forget the number, but it has to be a certain amount of the airline has to be owned by Canadians. And the airlines were just trying to take them down. Why would they do that? And then, of course, they probably swoop in and say, hey, we'll buy all your planes. We'll do all this stuff, you know. It is insane. You are being ripped off in Canada anyways, but this is just an unbelievable price increase in the cost of groceries. And you can see what's going on here because households are piling up credit card debt. Mortgage debt growth slowed in 2022, which is what most of us would expect, but credit card debt accelerated. On a year-over-year basis, credit card debt grew at a 13.8% annual rate in December compared with 4.7% for the same period in 2021. Now, doesn't that kind of tell a story of what's going on with inflation? Because if you think about that and you think about where the possible actual inflation rate might be at, which is around 20%, then you're probably like, yeah, 14%. So a lot of people, they're living the same life that they were living in 2021, but they're putting it on a credit card. And this is just an absolute disaster down the road. It's a disaster waiting to happen. And it's a train wreck that has unfolded in the past in the US, where you see this household debt situation get out of control like it's got out of control in Canada. And if I take you to this article from the Wall Street Journal, this really illustrates what went on in 2008. So if you go back to 2008, that was essentially when credit card peaked, but it was essentially going up all the way through when essentially the Fed was lowering interest rates. They were trying to stimulate the economy and do whatever it takes, and housing prices were declining. Credit card debt was still going up, unemployment was going up through that period, but eventually it all came to head when it collapsed, like you saw on this chart. And we know when this debt is destroyed, that can lead to asset price deflation, that can lead to deflation, and it means that essentially the money supply growth that you've seen is being reversed when that debt is being destroyed. And the biggest one for Canada is really going to be mortgages. But it is just mad when you think about food, because food is a basic item that we all need. And we can all probably agree that food is not correlated with incomes, because if you go to countries around the world, if you've traveled, you'll know that there are rich countries like the Netherlands where food is actually affordable. There are countries like the UK, where I'm from, where food, the competition between grocery stores means that there's not much margins within that, and food is cheaper than Canada. And, you know, you can also go to places in the Caribbean where wages are really, really low and food prices are really, really high. The Dominican Republic is a great example of that. You know, you've got people that are being paid just insanely low wages, and then you go into a grocery store and you're like, how do these people afford to live? The food prices aren't correlated with wages, but you know, you're pushing the people on the lower end of the income scale more and more towards poverty in Canada, and that's what we're seeing. And not only that, you've got an immigration system that favors bringing poorer people to the country. Now, I'm not here to debate whether you agree or disagree with that, but that's the reality that we have right now. So you're just importing more poor people that cannot afford these type of cost increases. They can't afford inflation to go up at this rate. And even at this rate, you can see from this chart right now, it is record level food inflation. So I think it is kind of a leading indicator, food inflation, because you are crushing people with this. People cannot, you know, cut back. Well, they can, and they are actually. That's the sad fact. You hear stories all the time in Canada of people cutting back on what they eat. And I just think that's incredibly so sad. I think you just have to think about how sad and how we've got to this point in a so-called quote-unquote rich country. Rich in debt, not so much rich in wealth. It's kind of crazy. So anyway, guys, if you enjoyed this video, you might like that one there. You might also like that one there. Thank you so much for watching. I decided to take the jacket off, do my top button undone, because people were saying I needed to relax and undo my top button. So anyway, I'll see